many, many times.
Okay. We'll go ahead and call to order the Kodiak Island Borough Assembly work session of Thursday, February 29th, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. We are in the Assembly chambers. First item on the work session agenda is citizens' comments. This is, the local number is 907-486-3231. The toll-free number is 855-492-9202. It's limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Anybody wishing to come forward, please do at this time.
Chris French, Community Development Director. I wanted to do a plug for the Planning and Zoning Commission's regular meeting on March 20th at 6:30 p.m., where they will be reviewing the accessory dwelling unit ordinance amendments that are proposed. They did hold a meeting in February, very light, no attendance at the time for that particular case, so we're hoping to get more people to come to the meeting on March 20th to give us any ideas or their comments on that draft ordinance. In addition, regarding the Airbnb or short-term rental item that's on for discussion in the work session, in addition to the document that Community Development provided regarding other jurisdiction regulation of short-term rentals or Airbnbs, I also did a handout as well, which you should have received from the clerk, regarding our current code, some of our definitions that are related to short-term rentals or group housing. And I just wanted to make sure that the Assembly had that, and also some of the staff analysis that was in there about potential for some changes that might clear up some conflicts that we have in those current definitions. And that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to come forward, please do so at this time.
Yes, good evening. David Conrad, Engineering Facilities Director. There was an article in last Thursday's paper. I was in Anchorage at the time. However, when I read it, I was a little upset by it. So I will read you. I sent an email to Steve Fisher from NC Machinery. This is specifically to the Traco, and his reply is as such. Hey, good afternoon, Dave. I encourage everyone to not talk to reporters, ha. I was not there when she spoke to them, but what I know is that the machines are the same, and the one you have now is the configuration you set out to purchase originally. She either misspoke or the reporter interpreted her answer in a creative way. On the second machine, we had to remove the existing bucket and swap the thumb to match the buckets you had on the island from your original order. So I wanted to read that to make sure that everybody understands we received the Traco that we did order. There were minor adjustments made. There was no deviation from the specification. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to call in or come forward? No calls. We're going to move on to agenda items. The first one is discussion of hospital and facilities repair and renewal. This is a request by Jared Griffin, Assembly member, I guess to discuss the process inefficiencies for procurement and general approaches to repairs and maintenance of new construction at Providence Kodiak Island Medical Center. Jared, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, there are really kind of two big things in here, and Mr. Mayor, I'll let you kind of decide how you want to handle the discussion there. The first one is you've probably noticed in several of our agendas that we are approving reimbursements for R&R work that Providence has already done, and kind of the hope and the spirit that the Borough Assembly will reimburse them, and which we have been doing as justified by the lease. But this is all the way back in August. So some things have changed, but, and maybe we'll let the manager talk about this more. There's still inefficiencies, but I guess the question is this the way that we want to conduct business with Providence? Is in this, they identify the problem, they work with our engineering and facilities folks, they do the work and then ask request reimbursement. Is that really the process that we want? Is it an inefficient process, or is this a process that is working for our staff and for our management? And the second issue then is what, and maybe this one's a little premature, but as you can see in the pretty lengthy R&R list for Providence, I think we're coming to a question of to what extent do we want to fund major repairs and major maintenance versus new construction for a new hospital, or as has been brought up at some assembly meetings, the releasing of our burden of the building to another entity. So one's, I think, kind of a pragmatic discussion about the process of procurement and reimbursement, and the other one maybe is just more visionary or about what are our plans and or what we feel our vision is for the hospital. And I think that kind of guidance will help us on the Health Facilities Committee as we talk to the hospital and come up with some parameters for how we move forward with some of those projects. So,
Thank you. Amy, I guess we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Because this is from August, I think we all know that a lot has changed. Sorry, I know this is going to be a little bit rough tonight. But as we've gone through these projects, I don't think them doing the work and then us reimbursing is the way that the lease is set up. It's not the way it's supposed to be. Anytime that they're doing work on the hospital, they're supposed to come to us and get permission first, which would come from you. That would be the right order. I brought the hospital lease with me to the Fire Protection Board meeting. Not saying that I was bored, Mr. Arndt, but I had some extra time on my hands while those discussions happened. And there are several sections in this lease that suggest our responsibility is only like for like. And so as we're looking at these different projects, I had a text written to you, but it was so late, Mr. Sherritt, that I didn't send it because I just didn't know if I could handle the I told you so at that hour. But there's two sections. One says like for like, and specifically with this sterilizer processing thing, because they are expanding so they can do orthopedic surgeries on the island. That is not like for like, that is an expansion, that is the definition of mission creep. I would want us to relook at that. I'm trying to find the text that I wrote. I ended up sending it to myself because I didn't want to send it to Dave at that hour either. So that is section 20.4. It says replacement and renewal is defined as an exchange of one fixed asset for another that has the same capacity to perform the same function. So I think that knocks us out of having to pay for that. And of course, we're going to have to talk to them. We'll probably end up talking to Scott Brent Erickson. But there's another section that said in 20.6 that says work performed on fixed equipment so that it can be used more efficiently for its current designated purpose or adapted to a new use would be considered a capital project. And capital projects are not to be funded through R&R unless both sides agree and then we alter the lease to cover it. So Providence has put a lot of money into our building. They have redone the pharmacy, they've redone laundry, they've reconfigured stuff, without asking, but it's an improvement to the building, so there's no repercussions for that. But those are capital projects, and those would have been their responsibility anyways. And so, it's not me picking on Providence. This lease has a lot in it as far as schedules and the exhibits that lay out a month-to-month schedule of how we should be handling R&R that has not been done. So we need to pick up our side and follow that schedule if we're going to enforce the lease. have them do what the lease says, then we should also be doing what the lease says. And it is clear that we have deferred maintenance and we have made some problems, but there are clear solutions right inside the lease. We do not have to reinvent any wheels. It says in there directly, if there are unexpected projects or projects that aren't covered inside of this enterprise fund, we alter the lease and the rent goes up. And those are scary words, and I don't have dollar values behind that. But for where we're at, and with major systems failing, Assemblymember Sherritt got a subscription to the copy of the estimated useful life of depreciable hospital assets. And so we've learned more about that hospital I have in the last few months than probably most people know. And there are systems that we are responsible for, but we only are responsible for them if the maintenance has been done and it's been done well. And so one part that we need to do is watch that the maintenance is getting done. So when the budget comes forward, this is always budget plugs. When the budget comes forward, you're going to see some new positions in there. And one of them is going to be a project manager to watch our maintenance people from different facilities. I want that person in my office because I feel like I'm directly responsible for that. So that person would ensure that maintenance at the hospital and the school districts was getting done, because those become our responsibility only when the maintenance is done correctly and preventative maintenance is at the end of its life. Then it becomes our issue. So when we look back at fire dampeners and all those projects that were emergencies that we had to throw money at, there's also an issue of we haven't looked at those in 6 years. So
Yeah, they were showing up on the yearly inspection report.
they
and
were.
weren't being addressed.
So with this lease, we have some work to do on our side to ensure that we're following the monthly schedule that's laid out in the exhibits. And I think once we do that, in conjunction with HFAB, we're going to be in a really good place.
Okay. Scott?
How are you going to approach the hospital with this change? Because I assume that they are unaware of section 20.6.
Well, I think that we just got used to pressing the easy button on repairs, and we went a long time without repairing. And so now that we're at a point where that project list is way more than the R&R fund, it's time to go back to see how we got there. And I think we've identified that through HFAB, and we know the deferred maintenance, and we know that we didn't have good communications. So now that we fixed the communication side, we go to the one instrument that we have that would rule how we do maintenance, and that's that lease. And it's good through the summer of 2027. And I think we just sit down and get their interpretation and our interpretation and work through it together. I'm not trying to spring anything on them. They signed the lease too, so.
Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Back to Assemblyman Griffin's question is what is the best way to move forward? I would like to make a shameless plug in here for the ARB and encourage all projects to go through the ARB, whether they are from an enterprise fund or an R&R fund or from a facilities fund. I firmly believe that checks and balances system should be utilized. There's an amazing amount of talent in there that can lend credence to viability of projects, as well as give insight that may not be gleaned from other sources. So I would encourage us to utilize the ARB in this fashion. Thank you.
Yeah, it's already in the ordinance on the ARB there, so. Any further questions? Yeah. Steve?
I'm a little concerned about them doing things and asking for reimbursement if we're not informed to know these things are happening. I think we at least need to know things are happening. Maybe we need to set a dollar value so they can do minor things, but if they're going to come to us for money afterwards, we should be informed that something is happening and that they are going to, I feel. The other question I have was, When you said like for like, and now they're putting a bigger, fancier machine in, do we feel that we should be responsible for what the like would cost, and they pick up the difference, or do they have to pick all of it up, or is that not spelled out in the lease? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good question. In the sterilizer particular case, we got a sterilizer from a different hospital that wasn't being used in the Providence system from St. Elias. So they didn't have a purchase price of that. They just transferred it. It certainly has value, but there wasn't a cost to them or us. We did pay for the shipping and installation for that one. In the sterilizer, in the project that we're doing, we are talking about upgrading all kinds of systems in order for them to be able to sterilize more. So that's the bigger conversation, and I think that's where we need to focus. But I do see your point that we would bear some responsibility, but in this particular case, it was just a trade from a different hospital.
Larry and then Ryan.
What I see has happened, at least from my perspective, is that, I think you used the word creep, that I think, when I was on the assembly last time, they were negotiating the hospital contract, and I think it's second only to the, I can't say garbage, what's the right word?
Solid waste.
The solid waste grant, and if they're not managed properly, then you get creep on one side or the other. And it takes a lot of time to manage something as complicated as that. And if we're not doing our part, and I'm not suggesting we didn't, but if we weren't, then the hospital's going to do what they can do. It's just automatic. And so I think it's going to be really important to pay attention to that. But my real comment is, the lease is up in '27, and it's probably important that we start looking at what we're going to do at the end of that lease, and we can't wait until '27, because it is complicated. One of the questions that we had last time was, what kind of profit are they taking out of Kodiak? And they wouldn't give us that number to, sort of look at what's going on here. But I think at some point in the very near future, we need to have some kind of committee or a consultant that is going to take a look at the future of the hospital. Ryan's mentioned some different things, and those can't happen all at once or even within a year. And so I think we probably need to come up with some timeline. I think you'll do a good job managing the contract, because that's what you're really saying, is it needs to be managed better, and I appreciate that. It's where we start. But in terms of a new contract and a new lease or a new direction, that's going to take some quality discussion time. It won't happen at one or two meetings, and it may involve a consultant. And there are other folk that were interested in bidding on the hospital last time.
Amy.
There is a provision in the lease for an additional 10-year term that goes so it would take it till 2027. They have to notify us 180 days before if they want to extend. So I'm sure we'll be in touch on that topic well before that 180 days.
I'll let you follow up,
Well,
Larry.
thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. It's mutual consent, the 10-year extension. Thank you.
Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to address Assemblymember Ames' comment about the like type. So one of the challenges that's going to present itself with doing a pro rata calculation for like type things is the building wasn't properly commissioned or air balanced in the beginning. So HVAC systems, heating systems, things of that nature weren't, in my opinion, and the facilities director can speak more to this, they weren't properly baselined. So I do believe there's some exposure there that we should probably consider and give some, again, some leniency to our tenants. But the other thing that we should consider is if we are changing the way we're going to ask Providence to conduct their projects, they are currently staffed with their project managers and their A&E firms that have contracts across the state with other facilities. I'm not entirely sure how they do it with other facilities, but I know that they're staffed to do it this way. So any change to that, I think that we should give them plenty of notice before we just turn that switch off, just so they can make any changes that they need to. I think that's it for now. Thanks.
Steve?
Thank you. Yes, I do understand the building had problems from day one, and therefore leniency should be considered. I also agree greatly, being a landlord and as borough representative, that any changes for the tenant should be given plenty of notice, talked about, and negotiated, not just light switch. Then and maybe there won't be changes, maybe it works. The other question I have is, Amy, you talked about someone making sure maintenance was done properly, and my question is that a full-time position, or might that person also be able to check on some of the other borough buildings, freeing up some time in the engineering department for them? And that's just a question.
My hope is that that person is going to fill our land management role as well. So I have other things to occupy them.
Yeah, and she had mentioned hospital and schools on there, so basically all borough buildings on there. Larry?
I was just going to say that our engineering and facilities director indicated at some point in the past during testimony that the hospital, as somebody mentioned, they have people that do this full-time, modify buildings, they have engineers, and the specifications for hospitals are complicated, and that it's to our benefit, to work with them in some of these issues, and it might save money, and I'm paraphrasing, so correct me. But I do believe that when we talk about leniency, from what I get, it's going to need to be granted on both sides as we move forward, because creep is sometimes a result of other people not doing the job, or, oversight. And I think, we've had a good relationship, and I think that you're well qualified to enter into that area and take care of it and move us forward so that we're following our lease.
Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, we'll move on here. Next item is discussion on limiting air, bed and breakfast rentals as long-term housing solutions. This was requested by Ryan Sherritt, so Ryan, I'll go ahead and turn this over to you to begin with. Yes, Lena.
Just really quickly, Mr. Mayor, if everybody can just check their mics, there's some feedback coming from somebody's mic being on. I think when there's more than two on at the same time, it causes that feedback. Mr. Smiley?
It's really creepy to have a hawk on your shoulder. Two of them look retweeted.
I hear noise. Yeah, it's not, the problem's not the mic, it's coming from a computer. That technology.
The fact that you discovered that
Just
is
blows you
amazing.
away?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, I'm just happy I can accommodate you.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, tonight in this discussion, both of the topics I'm going to talk about tonight are really feasibility discussions, discussions to find out if there's interest, have a general discussion about the topics, and the end state of this would be to identify if there are gaps from what Kodiak is doing versus what other communities are doing. And the ultimate goal in this proposition, or in this discussion rather, is to try and prevent crowdsourcing of viable rentals that are being taken off the marketplace. So I view this as kind of a twofold effort or twofold approach, one with another initiative that Mr. Whiteside and I are working towards. This is, in my opinion, the second half of that. So I want to give some numbers, and then through the mayor to the manager, I would ask that I could be able to call upon the staff to come up and help me out with some of this. So some of the numbers here, Last year in 2023, there was actually 68 lodges. This year, 87. That's an increase of 22%. Last year, 195 rentals. This year's 213. 126 of those are whole house or bedroom. And so what that does is if I look at the numbers of 126 whole house or bedrooms that are on this list, that's 126 whole house or bedrooms that, in my opinion, are not available for long-term residents. Those long-term residents fill vital roles within our hospitals, our police departments, our fire departments. I bring this up not only because this was 6 months ago on the yellow sheet. I bring this up because during multiple economic development discussions, we learned some very sobering numbers that this summer, the Kodiak Police Department will be at 50% capacity. They will have to select the calls that they can go to because they are understaffed. They cannot hire people, and those that they do hire cannot find housing. So the city is facing a hiring crisis because of a housing crisis. This is an effort to try and combat some of that within the means because we, as a community, are struggling with real estate. So with that, with the mayor's permission through the manager, I'd ask if SEMA would be able to come up and help elaborate on some of this and maybe fill in some voids where I haven't. And then Mr. French, if you'd be available to help with this as well.
Good evening. So Mr. Sherritt did give you the new numbers for 2020.
For the record, SEMA,
Oh,
our
sorry.
assessor. Thank you.
Thank you. The 2024 numbers were I just gave them to him today. We've been working on business personal property. And what it came down to was we added 64 accounts to our business personal property. That's taking out ones that are no longer businesses and putting back in, but all 64 of them were short-term rentals. So we grew from that 195 in 2023 to 213 for 2024. That's what we're going to go forward in. Now that only includes the ones that are advertising as of today. So as the year goes on, the numbers will increase. We'll put them on. Some of them will come back and say, okay, well, we never did it, or have reasons to be deleted. And of all of the numbers, we removed 14 properties to make it that it's only 64 that were new properties added. Does that make sense to you guys? So we have to remove business personal properties too. So there were 14 businesses that either shut down or changed, so it only made the number of new ones be 64, where if you add another 14, that's really how many Airbnbs or short-term rentals. I'd rather say it like that, short-term rentals. We've changed out all of our processing to try and call them just short-term rentals, and that is only either a whole house or a bedroom. It includes any kind of bed and breakfast, anything like that. Lodges have their own code, and they really are, I mean, it's a pretty big jump from 66 last year to 87 this year, too. Chris?
Ryan?
Yep, thank you, Seema, very much. If I could have, through the mayor, through the manager, Mr. French, if there would be anything that you'd like to add to help this baseline discussion moving forward, I would appreciate it.
I think for the handout that I gave the clerks to hand to you about the definitions, we do have some issues with defining, as Seema mentioned, we have short-term rentals that are the whole house, which would fall under a kind of a vacation home, which we do have that listed in the code. But in terms of someone renting out a room or two, there's some gap there in some of our definitions in the zoning ordinance in terms of addressing that. So that's something I think we would probably need to look at to try to fill in that gap that exists currently. There's also discussions, people, mix up short-term rentals with bed and breakfasts. Bed and breakfasts in our code have issues such as they have to have an on-site operator and they have to be serving meals. And so that cuts out any short-term rental that's just renting out a room. They're not serving meals and they may not have an on-site operator, so they wouldn't qualify as a a bed and breakfast. And currently in the code, there is some provisions that would allow, just in the definition of a dwelling unit, someone to rent a room, and it wouldn't be required for them to get a zoning compliance permit like it would if someone wanted to open a bed and breakfast or someone wanted to do a vacation home. And so there is some gaps there that we probably need to look at those definitions. In terms of what other jurisdictions are doing, I can tell you it's kind of all over the place within the state of Alaska. Just on Monday evening, the city of Homer voted not to approve their ordinance on short-term rentals that would have required an annual registration, would have required home inspections and things like that for safety, those kind of things. They turned that down, whereas other cities and boroughs within Alaska do have registration requirements, they do have home inspection requirements. So it just depends from city to city, borough to borough on how the different Alaska communities are looking at this issue.
Thank you, Mr. French. It's my understanding that in Homer, they did vote it down. However, it was not killed. It was actually voted down for reorganization and restructure. Is that anything you can speak to?
Well, they did, and that might be something I would have to follow up with the staff in Homer. And the news article that I read on there did mention that they were going to send it back to the commission for reorganization, but then it was ended up stating that it was voted down by the council there. So it's my understanding that if they voted it down, if they were to come back with anything, they'd have to start from scratch.
Roger, I appreciate that.
Okay.
My final question is, based on this handout, based on the readings that I've been conducting across the state, is this is up and coming. This is something that the entire state is addressing holistically. So this is essentially a perfect time for us to update our definitions. We've got definition gaps. This is a good time for us to propose, at least in my opinion, some revisions to the code, or at least have a discussion if we want to strengthen the code. Did I say anything that is necessarily incorrect or that you wholeheartedly disagree with?
So, before I worked here, I worked in Louisville, Kentucky, which has a huge short-term rental problem. Like many communities throughout the lower 48, they do. Now, you're getting some of that here in Alaska now, and certainly in rural communities where you have, housing issues, and that short-term rentals could cause that to be worse. I'm not going to say it's the primary cause, but it's an additional concern. What I would say, the main thing to look at is that the zoning ordinance is not your silver bullet to resolve the issue or fix it. Most communities within the state who are handling or regulating them, but pretty much all the communities in the lower 48 look at it as a two-tier piece. It's how you permit them in your zoning, but it's also, are you registering them? Are you dealing with life safety concerns? Are you making sure they're paying their taxes? And that's usually handled outside of the zoning code. So I think if you are, as the assembly, wanting to look at this, I would suggest to look at what do you want to do that's outside of zoning, what do we want to do within the zoning code.
Thank you very much for that clarification. That's all the questions I have for the staff. I would offer this back to the mayor for assembly-wide questions. Thank you.
Thank you. First is Larry and then Bo.
It seems to me that the short-term rentals are an economic engine in Kodiak right now. They provide, in southeast Alaska, when they closed the timber mills, they thought Ketchikan, Sitka, Wrangell were going to sort of close up, and they embraced tourism. They encouraged people to come into Kodiak, and that has become a big industry in Kodiak. And for tourism to come to Kodiak, they need a place to go. And so there's a lot of money coming into Kodiak because of what's going on. Unfortunately, though, they're competing against people that don't have a place to live or work in Kodiak. So we have sort of a balance between our housing needs that we have that are real and tourism, which is an economic driver, and we're all interested in economic development. And if we do anything to attenuate this new entrepreneurship in Kodiak, it's going to have an effect. So the real problem here in Kodiak, as I see it, is the need for land and affordable housing for our residents. And because we have less people, it seems like, than we've had in the past, and yet we have less housing. And I think one of our primary tasks is to see what we can do to stimulate land and land development to expand housing opportunities in Kodiak. And when we get into starting to regulate this new industry, first, it's going to be cops and robbers. It's taxing people, finding out who's doing it, who's not doing it. We're talking about new people, new regulations, and in a system that's very hard to regulate because I think, as Seema pointed out, we don't know how many people are really doing it that aren't even registering, which I assume there are a few, but I don't want to be too cynical about that. So I think to me, this is really important. And the discussion that Mr. French had about ADUs is also very important because our ADU code in the past has been very, very restrictive. And from my point of view, being there when they designed it, developed to be restrictive. So it would be very difficult to add ADUs and housing in Kodiak. So to solve the problem, one way is to add regulations to limit it, to try to control it, but I don't think it will work because I think that people will follow the money. I think what we really need to do is to provide more land and affordable housing to make it available. ADUs is one way, and I really appreciate the efforts that you're taking on that right now, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. But, I've been here a year and a half, and we haven't had one discussion on land. Okay, the number one priority, and we haven't, and we need to do that if we really want to solve this problem. And solve it through regulations and cops and robbers, or we can solve it by making land available. And I'm really appreciative of you bringing this up because I think it's an important topic. And if we don't have housing here, we're just going to keep shrinking. Thank you.
Bo.
Thank you. This is the topic I ran on. This is it. That we do have a housing crisis. And there's no sugarcoating that. When we have first responders who are not coming here, we cannot fill these positions who are keeping our community safe because there's no housing. We've had potential business owners openly conveying in front of us that they are not going to open a business here because they don't have a place to live. That is suppressing economic development, in my opinion. We have all of these types of lodging to cater to tourism. I'm targeting vacation home by this definition, single-family homes. That's what we need to make available for our residents for long-term rentals. Short-term rentals, looking at these numbers, it's not slowing down. Anytime a house comes up for sale, someone buys it and turns it into a vacation rental. This is a big problem. And I agree, we do need to think about medium and long-term solutions, but none of which are going to alleviate this crisis in the next 5 to 10 years. No matter how you spin it, we could have land available tomorrow. How long is that going to take to develop and get houses built and get people moved in? This is a problem we need to address right now. I understand the economic driver. However, I think we're stifling economic development and focusing on the near term and what's in front of us right now. But people are suffering. We have people wanting to move here, open businesses, but they can't do it. And saying we shouldn't find a way to limit this because of lack of enforcement or accountability is a poor excuse. And it's not, this is by no means criticism to staff. This is just, we are trying to keep up with the rapid increase in this housing scenario. I think we can get there. I think we can get there quickly. But I push back strongly on allowing this to continue to suppress housing availability based on the economic driver alone. I think that's a poor approach. I don't know if we should think about ways to limit it based on types of housing. That would be my preferred approach to free up single-family homes for people who want to move here and stay here and open businesses and provide services such as the police department and fire department. but this is an issue. I've been waiting a very long time for this topic. And an ordinance is coming, whether it's from myself or Mr. Sherritt. This is something that people are pretty upset about. And really, ultimately, who is it benefiting? It's benefiting the most wealthy on the island. If we talk about progressive taxation or regressive taxation, or policies that are progressive or regressive, who are we benefiting here? We're protecting the wealthiest on the island who are gobbling up these homes, or people who don't even live here are gobbling up these homes and making a killing. And they're suppressing the community, and it's crippling our community. But sorry, I'm getting a little worked up because this is important. This is really, really crippling our community, but I'll leave it at that.
Steve?
As an assembly, we have to be careful to what we do. I understand your point, but if someone is opting to open a business that meets all the zoning rules that are in force at the time, we're opening a can of worms if we try to say they can't or limit them. So zoning laws or other conditions would have to change before anything like that could happen. Because if they're meeting all the present legal requirements, we really can't tell them no. This came to a big point where I had a place in Arizona in Snowflake. The churches were all against this 40 acres of enclosed greenhouse growing marijuana. They were all against it. One guy voted for it who was well known in the religious circles, and they were all upset. And he said lawyers advised they met every single legal requirement. So therefore, my personal feelings did not matter. I had to vote yes because we set forth requirements and they met them. So any kind of limiting, it's going to have to go back to the basic rules that guide the use of the property, meaning zoning. Thank you.
James?
So I can appreciate this coming forward because I've felt the constraints of the short-term housing issues, not being able to find long-term housing solutions for my business that I work at. I do appreciate all of the different boroughs and cities, stances on this or what they've decided to implement. If there's one that I keep going back to is the city of Seward, which is a short-term rental permit required. State and city business licenses are required. Bed tax registration is required. 1 parking lot space per guest room. And that's a big one for me because there's a lot of places on this island that don't have enough parking. And that's a big one. That's 1 parking space per guest room. That's a lot of parking for some of these housing units. Whether or not they're renting every single one of them doesn't matter. They've got to have 3 spaces if they have a 3-bedroom that they're renting out, right? So life safety inspection is required by a licensed home inspector. There's not a lot of home inspectors around here, so they got to have somebody come in to do that most times. But that's another good one to have. As for limiting how many short-term rentals, I'm not in favor of that, even though it affects me in my looking for long-term rentals. I don't agree with limiting somebody trying to better themselves. Yes, most times you're going to see somebody that has a little bit of money that's going to be able to buy a house. I have known people that buy houses, rent them out, whether it's long-term or short-term, and they still rent an apartment. They still buy homes year after year to have this income stream for themselves. It's just another job for them. For me, I don't like the fact of limiting how many there can be, even though I'm personally affected. So that's where I stand on this.
Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can appreciate Assemblyman Turner's position. The latter of your discussion was buying a home and renting it out. My intent with this is not to stifle somebody from buying a home and renting it out. My attempt at this is to prevent somebody from buying a home and not enabling somebody to stay past 2 months or 3 months and creating an unstable housing market so that they can kick someone out so they can rent them out to contractors in the summer. This has been an episodic year-over-year event with construction season in Kodiak for as long as I can remember. So if you were to buy a second home and rent it out, my intent of this is to create a stabilized, available, choice-based housing for people that want to move here and work within our community. So I just wanted to address that comment. The first part of your sentence is to emulate the city of Seward, and that was exactly the one that I had looked at as well, thinking this is probably the closest one. And the reason I specifically like Seward is you could relax some of those requirements if it became too strenuous. The final thing that I'll say is that a lot of this is, although this yellow slip was turned in several months ago, I have been attending the Kodiak Economic Development forums, and they are working on a series of recommendations. They've got a steering committee. They're meeting in a couple weeks. I would ask that when that committee is done and they've got recommendations, that we ask them to come and present those here so that their findings don't fall on deaf ears or get set on a desk someplace. I would love to see that presentation here at the assembly level, just as a general idea seeking or brainstorming event. I don't have all the answers. That's why this is a discussion tonight. I did not come prepared to say this is my way and this is how I want to do it. I just know that there's a problem, and there's been a problem for a lot of years, and we have the ability to decide how we want to solve that problem. Because when I can't bring staff here for my own business, that's on me not to bring it up then. And so that's why it's here. I'm trying to expand my business, and I can't. And so this right here is why we're talking about it. So, thank you.
Bo?
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not proposing that, or I'm not against people owning income properties. I think it's important that we incentivize long-term rental options for all these reasons. I mean, how many people up here stated that not only have we heard people say this is stifling economic development, people sitting up here are saying that they're personal businesses. So when we think about what's an economic driver, do we want our, if the current hot economic driver is solely based on vacation rentals or short-term rentals versus how much diversity we can get out of someone coming in from all these different businesses, including potential new businesses coming to the island, that's true economic development. That's not just a flash in the pan, people wanting to come fish. That's expanding our community. That's long-term economic development. That's just not Kodiak's the latest and greatest place to come visit. We want people here for the long term, not just capitalizing on solely people coming here for 2 weeks to come fill some coolers and head out. So that's how I feel about it.
Amy and then Jared.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing that maybe the Assembly could consider is a tax break for homeowners who own more than one home but offer a long-term rental situation in the second home instead of short-term. Short-term people would be considered a business and be paying personal or, business personal property tax, whereas long-term may not, if that's something that they're offering furnished or not. So there are ways that the borough could actually incentivize the long-term rental instead of the short-term rental.
Jared.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to say. First, I have a couple questions. of the 200 and some odd STRs that are here, do we have an idea of how many are owned by off-island corporations and businesses?
Sorry, I don't.
So we're making these claims that it's a thing, but we don't really know exactly, or we can find out though.
I could definitely have numbers for you on how many are here and how many are.
Okay. I'm with Larry and thinking that, you know, the goal for us, for our community, shouldn't be rentals. The goal should be home ownership. That's the standard that we want. That's the standard that helps young families build equity, and that's where we, I think, really want to get to. Short-term rentals, long-term rentals are maybe, you know, are options for people, but I think globally, holistically, we should be thinking about helping families and people get to that. There are a couple of things. We could absolutely do tax abatements. While you know, we're thinking about using taxes on STRs for tourism, but that's also through business license, through bed taxes. You know, we can use that money to supplement tax abatements for what Amy mentioned, or for new development, you know, to encourage more of that home ownership rather than home rental. So for me, that's the goal, is home ownership for as many as we can get. I'm not against also, you know, new short-term rentals, but, you know, with anything, we have to, I think it falls on us to moderate growth. There are ways that we can moderate growth. I used to live in a suburb of Dallas and Grand Prairie, and they're like, we don't want any more apartment buildings. We need to encourage more home ownership for this growing suburb. And so they came up with some kind of system of no more new apartment buildings until there's a new lot for residential development. When a new lot for residential development becomes available, then there's some kind of bidding process for a new, you know, apartment structure, you know, somewhere else. So to moderate that growth, and also encouraging the growth of home ownership at the same time. So I like the city of Seward one, probably the best too. I think there's some things that we could do with that. So yeah, thanks.
All righty. Next is Larry, then Scott, then Steve.
I would be opposed to incentivizing people, as you suggested, simply because we're running out of money already and having to do that. I think if we were going to incentivize, it would be to developers to develop land, to give them a tax break. Even, here's the land, you develop it, put in the services, and we'll partner with selling it. And we make money by selling the land, and we provide a tax base. And to create zoning guidelines that support mini houses, you know, 3,000, 4,000 square foot lots. What I'm told is a different generation. They don't build these big houses. And I would say a police officer trying to come to Kodiak is not going to even be able to afford an Aleutian home that now we're selling for over $300,000. And that's a house, it's a market economy, and we can't change that. But we can incentivize land development. We have a lot of land. You know, the Otmaloy Road is surrounding a big chunk of city borough land that could be developed. Okay, there's lots of land to develop that we have. We've never made it happen. We need to look at our regulations, simply like we're looking at ADUs. We need to look at the regulations we put in place that developers can't develop it. When I built my house in Mozart Circle, I paid $22,000 for it. You know, it's just like $2,000 down. And Len Grothe, he developed what, pretty much all Salif, Scott?
Between Len Grothe and Lee Russell.
You know, and they sold lots, and people were like me, who was on a teaching salary, which was not very high, was able to build a house and live. And that same house now is probably, you know, close to $500,000. And they can't do that, so it's land, land, land. And it's one thing that we can control immediately, and it is not as long-term as people think to build a house. So a young person coming to Kodiak, a new teacher, makes $50,000, $55,000 a year. How are they going to buy a house, even if we opened up all of these houses? These are not small houses. They couldn't afford them to begin with, generally, at that salary. So I believe we can do what we need to do. We need to promote zoning that provide mini houses that people can buy that are 400, 500 square feet. And the other thing is that, I don't know, how many of your employees that work online at a cannery, excuse me if I can ask a question like this, live here?
I think offline on that, not here.
Pardon?
Offline, you can do that. I don't think that's adequate.
Yeah, I think the question is that, the reason we're importing so many workers is there's no affordable housing. It used to be, when I was younger, that you could live in a house and work in the process industry. In any case, I think we should do what we need to do, which is make land available, make incentivize developers, and develop zoning requirements that facilitate small lots. One time when we were considering that, and I'm referring to what you said about rich landowners here stopping everything, it was stopped because some people said, well, if you build small property, then those people will move in. I never understood what those people meant. I sort of thought I knew what they meant. But if we're really serious about it, we need to make some moves as an assembly. Thank you.
Next is Scott, then Steve, then Ryan.
Well, I think there are a whole bunch of different problems that we're trying to address at one time here. And I think one thing we should do is look at why people created so many Airbnbs in the past year and a half or 2 years. Is it because the hotel prices are too high? Is that the reason? Is there a market for all of these Airbnbs? How much rental did they actually manage to get paid for? I don't think we know any of that information. My guess is that if there's 65 or 64 Airbnbs that are new, they're not all going to survive. But that's just my guess. I do think that we also should pay attention to the Housing Authority's analysis from a couple of years ago, which shows that it's really expensive to build a house. Even a small house is really expensive because they have a kitchen and they have a bathroom, and those are the two most expensive parts of the house, except the roof and the land or something. Actually, the land is probably the cheapest part. But at any rate, I think we need to find out more information about why this is going on, whether it's a continuing trend or not. Clearly, there's a problem in town. I think a list of outside investors who have bought up properties would be fun, but it'd be kind of nice to know if there are moguls in town that have 15 houses or something. Then we can pick that apart. And at any rate, I don't think this is going to be solved quickly. And that's my 2 cents worth.
Steve, then Ryan, then James.
Mr. Sherritt mentioned that summers, lots of construction people rent, and he is correct. Being in that industry, I see it all the time. The problem is, most of them are a lot more than 30 days rentals, and so therefore, they're not even fitting under the short-term rental thing to begin with. How to deal with that issue is a serious question, but the short-term rental being limited to 30 days means a lot of those people don't qualify. I know last spring they were looking for 6 and 7 month leases. So what does that count as? And I don't have the answer if that's a question.
Ryan, then James.
Thank you. So I can name at least 5 people off the top of my head that have said they rent their houses out for 4 months out of the year and let them sit empty for 8, and they make more money that way. And that is, in my opinion, a problem when we can't find housing and we're about to face public safety shortage. So as much as I love free enterprise and entrepreneurship, I think that from the perspective of having a stable economy that is not episodic economic engine, that is more in for the long haul, is in our best interest as a community. So we aren't going to solve this necessarily by ourselves. I think it is going to take a collaborative approach and public testimony. I think those that have the housing units that we're talking about should please come in and testify. Tell us your side of the story. I think that people seeking long-term housing should come in and testify. I think that this is going to need to be a collaborative effort between all the stakeholders, including the city and the school district, because I know the school district is also struggling finding housing for their teachers. And now we're impacting one of our primary charters as a governing body. So I would just, again, I think this is healthy discussion, but I would like to see this go somewhere. I'd like to see some sort of direction come out of tonight's meeting so that the staff has something to work on, or we have some goal that we are collaboratively working on. And those tuning in, if the Kodiak Economic Development is tuning in, know that we're getting serious about this. So, thank you.
James and then Bo.
Let's see, where do I start?
Anywhere you want.
I'm going to start with one of the questions that was asked. Approximately 70% of my staff is locally, they're employed from locals, depending on the year. There's a lot of local workforce that go to the Bay during the summer for the 2 months that it runs for. So I lose that staff and have to bring a few more lower 48, interior Alaska, or H-2B workforce into Kodiak. So I have to hold a certain amount of rentals year-round. That number right now is at 26 rentals in order to be able to have enough room for staff. So if that answers that question. I had a rental that was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath rental. I was paying $2,700 a month for, partly because of that's what they're asking for rents for some of these units. When the lease was up, I tried to extend that lease, and the homeowner said, I'm not really interested in extending the lease at this time. I had one person staying in there for a year. The homeowner said, not interested in renewing the lease at this time unless you can pay $5,500 a month, because between what I can get for Airbnb or Verbo or whatever you want to call it, I make that in a year, so that 12-month expense would have to be taken up by you. So almost doubling the cost of a rental. And so if we're looking at how much are these guys actually making, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath is basically making enough to have $5,500 a month of income based over a 12-year period.
12-month period?
Over a 12, so it's $5,500 a month is what I would have had to pay to come close to what he was making for the vacation rental that he was going to be using it for. So, what is that, 80 a year for one rental? I just purchased a house, as most of you know. My rent on that house is, my mortgage payment is now $1,200 less than what I was paying in rent for the same house. So rents are not inexpensive in this town. One of the other pieces that we all forget, and the reason why we're in part of this crisis, is Jackson's. Started it off, right? That started us off in the housing crisis. And then all of a sudden, Kodiak Plaza, almost within a few months of each other. Basically, people moved out of Jackson's, moved into Kodiak Plaza, and were kicked out during Christmas, and most of them moved off island, because at the time there weren't enough hours at the cannery, any of the canneries, or any of the other businesses in town. There weren't a lot of people looking for workers at that time. Nobody looks for anybody during the winter, really, until mid-January. So we lost close to 600 local employees that are in our lower-end labor force, right? It doesn't show that in our numbers for our consensus. And I'll tell you that the consensus counted the employees that were non-local, didn't ask them where they came from, they just put them down as local. So I had 125 non-local employees counted into our census. And that was just where I work. Okay? So the fabrication of the numbers is not very good for us in the future or now. But losing two large housing locations, whether they be, low rent trailers or minimum rent apartments, large amounts of people lost their housing, and that put us into our crisis. I have employees that have 3 families in a 4-bedroom house. I have employees that have 5 families, meaning a husband and a wife, a husband and a wife, a husband and a wife, and a husband and a wife, and a husband and a wife in a 3-bedroom with all of their kids because they can't afford housing here. How do you fix that? Well, the housing numbers, the cost of housing is not going to go down. So how do you do that? You supplement, you help them out with loans. Some states do that, some cities do that. Not here. We're not willing to do that. We're not willing to float a loan for somebody that's low income. You don't see that very often. Some authorities are doing that, but not near enough as this community needs. Okay? I have 2 employees that just moved here as of January 1. Both of them have put in offers on houses. They're not renting. They're going to be buying houses. There's enough houses out there to buy, but they're so damn expensive that they're spending every single dime that they have to put a down payment on because there is no assistance for them because they make just that much too much. What we need to look at is that mid person, that lower end person that doesn't have the ability to get the down, and give them down payment assistance, and we can fix some of this crisis. Yes, we do need to build more homes. We do need to build more apartments. But that's not going to be for a while. As somebody mentioned earlier, the quickest way is housing assistance for their mortgage. How do they get that down to get to that 20%? The community needs to do something. That's where I see us fixing the problem.
Thank you. Bo?
So I'll offer another perspective on that, and I agree with Mr. Turner. It's difficult for people to buy a home, but I would argue that lack of inventory is inflating the prices and creating and just adding fuel to the fire. When you throw out figures like that, when people name how many examples have been brought up today in previous meetings where it's so lucrative, whatever that house costs in the market right now, people that have the money are going to buy it because they can easily meet and exceed that mortgage payment by far. So when we think about affordability, it's based on inventory. We don't have a good housing inventory here because people who are wealthy, who can afford to purchase a home no matter the cost, because they know they can recoup that with 5-6 months of Airbnb renting. How do you think these prices keep skyrocketing? It's because there's no inventory, because people buy them, and they flip them into an Airbnb and recoup their costs and are making a killing. There's no way on this current trajectory, by letting this free-for-all continue, but currently, this is fueling the crisis, and that's because of inventory. We don't have enough housing available. The few that come up, I looked at Zillow today. I was excited to see this on the agenda finally, and I was very patient because I knew it was coming, but jump on Zillow, see how many houses are available. 2-bedroom, 1 bath, $450,000. I bet you I know who's going to buy that and what's going to happen to it, because they can get it back through Airbnb. It's a housing inventory issue is what we're facing near term. I completely agree the path to home ownership is the goal. People can't get there if they don't have that stair step of having a long-term rental to where they can save up that money to buy a home. So I agree with a lot of points that have been made. This isn't going to be a straightforward solution, but I think people are putting the blinders on what's truly creating this near-term crisis, and it is vacation rentals, without a doubt.
Thank you. Any further discussion? We're going to go ahead and move on there then. It'll be continuing to come up on there. As we all know, we've gone to different things. There is, first time through the state, there is first-time home buyer assistance if you qualify. I don't know what those qualifications are, but I've known a bunch of people that have been able to use that to get into it too.
Less than 60,000
That's not enough. Yeah. So, yeah, but we're not going to solve everything, but we'll continue to look at it. Like I said, it'll continue to come up. Next item is discussion pertaining to transfer stations and recycling requirements. This was requested by Ryan Sherritt, so I will go ahead and turn over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's see if I can have another topic that brings great discussion.
Here's to the eye.
This one is a little closer to home in regards to my passion. So I prepared a document. I'm just going to read from it. Albert Einstein once said, "The significant problems we face cannot be solved with the same level of thinking we were at when we created them." A typical waste transfer station mainly consolidates trucking shipments to various locations. However, I'm looking at the viability of a waste transfer station to sort waste materials, maximizing our ability for disposal of waste and recycling, and combining a transfer station by definition with a materials recovery facility by definition. I recently authored a document that revised the demolition project here in town that included a sorting aspect during the tear-down phase of an industrial facility. That waste stream was separated into 6 waste streams: wood, gypsum, metals, fiberglass, and plumbing, mechanical systems, and other materials. Due to the nature of the seclusion on the island, I feel we must look at community waste management system that reviews the waste streams in a symbiotic relationship for recycling the renewables. The first step in this waste reduction is from the knowledgeable consumer, but there's no incentivization, and we know that things cannot be inconvenient, otherwise we don't do them. The next step is to remove the single-use mentality that places with more abundant resources and selections have become single-user and disposable item locations. A centralized transfer station that conducts sorting and segregation would lead to less pollution, fewer white goods outside of dumpsters, fewer mattresses on the street, less dumping out our road systems, and yes, I am talking about a complete overhaul of the current waste management system that Kodiak currently conducts. Currently, the country's municipal solid waste is composed of the following categories: paper and cardboard, food, garden and yard waste, plastic and rubber, metals, textiles, wood, glass, and other. Here in Kodiak, I would add fishing-related waste as well as a top contributor. A centrally located waste transfer station could extend our landfill's life, allow for more local innovation with recycled and reused products, and enable better stewardship of our community. To put things into perspective, the World Health Organization illustrates waste management in third world countries as having inadequate waste collection systems, low or no recycling rates, poor treatment or no treatment, uncontrolled disposal or illegal dumping, inadequate technology, and low awareness of health risks. If any of those struck home or sound familiar, I would argue that each one exists in Kodiak. Once we determine by this evening's discussion, I would like to ask that the Solid Waste Advisory Board get involved and determine viability, cost, locations, and regulatory impacts, and seek similar-sized communities' success or failures with such an idea. Imagine a world where we could utilize someone else's waste for our benefit. Construction waste, such as 2x4s or plywood, car parts, metals, electronic waste, or even someone's partially used industrial products like paint thinners, paint. The list goes on. As an environmental professional, I believe we owe it to our future generations to yield the best care we can, leaving minimal impact for the next generation. I'll open the floor for general discussion.
James.
Man after my own heart. I've been talking about this for a while. The first topic that I brought up years ago was waste to energy. Yeah, I knew you'd have a book on that. Why haven't we dove more into that? Yes, it's a relatively new, some communities have done this, put in a very, very large facility thinking that they were going to get more trash than they could possibly handle, and wound up failing at it in the U.S. One is in Florida that I remember, and one is in Virginia that both failed because they couldn't find enough trash to burn. The other piece of that is we have a lot of energy sources on this island already. But as we see, we're going to be increasing our rates because we have to generate so much and because of the wages. So we could supplement some of those costs by having a waste energy. This type of system is used in Europe all over, and they don't sort anything, all of it. Every single pound gets burned and sorted after the fact. The metals are sorted out. You find a lot of precious metals in there that can be resold, making the
Operation?
well, helping the operation with the sale of precious metals or non-precious metals. Plastics are all gone. You're buying from the smaller communities and shipping it to Kodiak to be burned so that we can get rid of their waste as well. The smallest one that I have found is basically 15 tons of waste daily. What does our landfill produce? I don't have that figure off of the top of my head. The other stream that I was looking at, coming from another location other than Kodiak originally, and where my parents live and where my in-laws live right now, they have 3 dumpsters. They pay for 3 dumpsters at their house. Every house is required to have 3 dumpsters. One is for yard waste, and that yard waste gets taken to a facility separate from the landfill where discards such as, in the particular instance of my parents, that is mixed with tartar from winemaking, and they stir that up. They use the landscaper's discard from yard waste, tree limbs, all of that stuff. They churn that on a regular basis, and then they sell all of that, making even more money for the city, to where people can use them in their flower beds. They use the fecal matter from their recycling centers, if you will, or anyway. So they do all that, and then it's yard mulch. Okay. The other container that they have is a recycling bin, and that goes to a recycling center, and that all gets separated by what kind of recycling it is, and then that is sold off or burned because it can't be sold off. And then the final one is standard garbage, and standard garbage would be your food waste, which should go into your green waste, but a lot of people put food in there anyway. But the majority of it is just stuff that shouldn't be in the recycle bin. There isn't a lot that goes into their gray garbage can. Their gray garbage can is the smallest of the three. The largest is their yard waste. The middle one is their recycling, similar to size to the yard waste. And then the smallest one of all, which is basically a 10-gallon can, is for their general waste. And they pay $75 per can where my parents live and where my in-laws live. And then it's all paid for.
Thank you. I would love for you to continue whenever you catch your breath, James. I think this is a fantastic idea. I'm not educated in this area, but what I can offer is when I applied for a position here and it was offered, and I researched Kodiak Island, I thought it was the coolest thing how advanced this tiny community is when thinking about renewables. Like, holy cow, like how much energy is produced here. Granted, I know it's a cost savings exercise as well, but it's really, Kodiak pops up in articles in that we were kind of leading the charge there as a community, but then we're also the same community who is burying thousands upon thousands of pounds of plastic, constantly burying plastic. It's blowing in the water, clogging up the ocean, and this is I'll try to keep this story very short. I went on a lot of surveys, fishery abundance surveys off the west coast of Oregon, Washington, California. One in particular, there was a limnologist on board taking water samples I don't remember how the frequency, but it was many samples throughout the day. At the end of a 30-day cruise, I asked this person how many samples had microplastics. And she responded with how many didn't have plastics. And the answer was not a single sample didn't contain plastic. 100% of them had plastic in it. So I don't have children, but I think a lot of people up here do and have grandchildren. And what kind of stewards are we if we're promoting this kind of pollution? Burying it in the ground isn't the solution. I've always been an advocate for recycling. I know we're limited here, but if this idea I think has a lot of merit, if it's something we can achieve, I don't think we need to, and there's already examples of areas that have done it, and if there's a unit or an approach that can be scaled to our small community need, why wouldn't we pursue that? I mean, outside of just being cost prohibitive to where it would cripple the community financially, I think it's just a great idea. I would support it 110%. So thank you, James, and others who are, and Mr. Sherritt, who are trying to find solutions for this garbage problem. When I think about waste and what that is, I view it as plastic. I mean, non-biodegradables, we're just clogging the planet up. And if we can find a way to address that has a downstream benefit of producing energy and or income, I fully support that. So thank you both.
I'm going to go ahead and go back to Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to address Assemblyman Turner's suggestion for thermal energy destruction. So I'm very familiar with the European Union and their process for thermal destruction, also thermal oxidation systems or TOSs. The reason that it works in the EU is that they don't have a Clean Air Act like we do. We have not only the Clean Air Act that was promulgated off the Environmental Protection Agency, it's a sub-tier of the Environmental Protection Agency regulations. We also have what's called NESHAP, or National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants. Those are two that the EU does not have. They have their own version of emission standards, and they are about 400 times more relaxed than what the United States has. So TOS systems aren't environmentally apt yet. The technology hasn't developed yet. So that just want to kind of talk about that. But one of the things that I really want to emphasize, you know, we heard from the manager's report a couple meetings ago that the yard waste was dumped at Dark Lake, and we had to have a contractor burn waste at Dark Lake, and it was quite an effort. And I live just down the street, you know, but the smoke resonated all the way to my house. And when the wind shifted, it resonated throughout the city. And it was really kind of something. So if you think about the NESHAP standards that I just mentioned, and you think about how we're doing things now, I don't know if necessarily we're compliant there either. But I'll leave everyone with a final thought in this discussion is, I was at a facility, I won't say where and I won't say when, but this facility has some fantastic recycle bins located here in Kodiak, and you know, a spot for plastics, a spot for paper, and they're within the same container. And at the kind of end of this discussion, I watched people sort and put things where they were. I hung around long enough for the custodian to come through and take each of the bags out and put them into one single bag and throw the entire bag into the garbage. So recycling takes a community, and it takes awareness, and even our best intention may not always be met. And I want to address Bo's comment. There's no waste management that is a net neutral cost. So we can't go into this with a mindset, maybe it wasn't your comment, sorry, but we can't go into this with the mindset of what is the cheapest way to do this, because environmental problems that we put off today are exponentially increased in dollar value down the road. Thanks.
Larry.
When we were negotiating or talking about the landfill, I think around 2015, I had returned, I talked to the engineering facilities, but I had an opportunity to help my son remodel his house in Fairbanks at the time. And he lived very close to a transfer site in Fairbanks, and they have 5 of them. And I was very impressed with it. It looked to be like at least an acre and a half, this one by his house. It had probably 25 dumpsters that were slanted, really like 8 foot in the back and like my wife's size in the front, which she's 4'11", or that you could throw stuff in. And they had a number of them, so you could have 10 people in there, and they just pull up and no covers. The whole thing is fenced off with barbed wire. They close it at a certain time. And it was easy to drive into. You just drive in, you pick a dumpster and throw what you want away. But they also had a place for construction waste, very easy to get to, right there. It was part of the horseshoe, if you will. They had a covered area, concrete base, roof, very nice, where anybody that wanted to leave something that somebody else might use, they left there. And you saw dressers, gosh, there was a motorcycle there my son ran off with, and that I had to bring back. But, and people would be there every day to see if there was something there they could use in their house. And people were very careful about what they put there. They didn't put junk. They had a place for wood, they had a place for recycling, everything, it was all right there, easy to get to. And I came back here thinking, boy, wouldn't it be great to have something like that? Because what I've learned in a few meetings is that the contract we have is very, very complicated. And it's very difficult. And everybody, they don't have roll carts, they bring it to they bring it to the transfer site, and they have 5 of them. And it facilitates recycling, because if it's easy to do, if it's simple, if you can just go, people will do it. If it's not simple, people will be too busy to do it, and they will do what the janitor did. And I understand in some exploration from engineering facilities that it's expensive. And I assume that to be true, but I do know that the community seemed to enjoy it. It was clean. They cleaned it up, I think, once a week. Anything that was left there under the giveaway, they got rid of. But when you look at how complicated it is to throw garbage trucks all around the community and have bears, it'd solve so many problems. I really wish we would look into it, because I think it would accommodate a lot of the recycling that you're talking about by making it easy. You know, I drove by one in Fairbanks last week when I went by. It looked pretty clean, but on the other hand, it could have been locked up at the time. I don't know, but I think it's a good start. But again, if it costs too much.
So to answer your question, James, about 30 tons a day is average.
How much?
About 30 tons per day is
That's
an
a
average.
$75 million plant.
So the other thing I'll say is, with permission, we will send out the NREL report that we received. We were given a grant here approximately a year or so ago, have the NREL. We released that to the Borough Assembly. Those who were on it at the time should have seen it, and basically they came back and said that a digester would be the most cost-effective thing for us, that you're looking at a smaller waste-to-energy plant, so startup cost as far as ignition source, because of not being able to run it on a long-term rolling basis, becomes rather expensive. No one on staff ever said it couldn't be done. All we said was we're going to have to pay for it. My pet peeve, quite frankly, is when I open a dumpster and see a black smile looking back at me when there's a recycled dumpster 5 feet away. So the only other thing I have to tell you is we need to also enforce if we're going to put rules and regulations in place. Mr. Sharrett, you have a very puzzled look on your face.
Cardboard.
Amazon cardboard box.
Thank you.
No, those are white smiles. But anyway, we have to think about enforcement, and we can. This is my personal opinion. I just heard a whole lengthy discussion about land and all this. I'm not sure where we're going to put a couple of transfer sites. Right now, we have one piece of land that I think would be suitable for it, and it is not centrally located. It is located centrally in the city. Thank you.
Further discussion on there? Not sure. Steve?
Well, the discussion that it costs, and yes, it will cost, but I think we need to. I moved here late 90. Anyone who's lived here very long remembers when you drove to the landfill, there was a giant pit, and down in the pit, you could get car parts. It's a long time ago, but it was a giant pit. It is now a mound. When you think about the cost of recycling, you also have to include what is the cost for land to put stuff into on a continuing 30-year basis. And the cost of doing nothing compared to that. It's a trade-off, and yes, maybe it'll cost more, but will it cost more than buying land or finding a place or expanding land? Because that landfill is filling. As I said, any of us who've been here any length of time, remember every time you went there, you drove down. Now the mounds are up. And so the longer we wait, the greater this problem is going to become. Thank you.
James?
So I did some research years ago. A 15-ton per day is about $60 million, and a 30-ton per day is about $75 million. Depending on what you did, with the after process, and part of that after process is rainwater, your steam generated or smoke generated from the burning of it, and that is basically broke down into two fuels. One is methane gas, and the other one is I can't remember which one it is, but some communities, such as the one in Florida that is still in existence, pumps it into their natural gas flow. And then your gases that are released are pumped through a bath, if you will, of rainwater to lessen the amount of additives into the ozone or into the air, keeping the smell to a minimum, or a zero is what they call it, meeting those requirements that you had mentioned. And this is all relatively new in the last 5 years, developed by MIT to collect those biogases as well. And so there are additions that you can do to come up to compliance for that vapor that is actually leaving the plant. As for transfer stations, that was one of the other subjects tonight. We talked about the one that was just mentioned over Dark Lake area, but we also have a large piece of property in Bell's Flats that we lease to somebody that we can probably take a little bit back for another transfer station if we thought about it. So that we have two.
That it, James? Yeah. Okay. Just checking. Jared?
I'm a layperson in all of this. I think this is a fantastic thing to pursue, and would support 100% solid waste committee to look at this and research this for us. And experts in the room also correct me if I'm wrong. There's this truism, and I don't know if it's like a statistically real kind of thing, but that but I'm going to use it for right now. That between 2.5% and 3% of recyclable waste is municipal, and then the rest is commercial, is industrial. And if that's true for us, then I would maybe just also ask the committee to, if it helps with costs or anything, maybe focus on, if we're going to do transfer stations, focus on those more readily accessible for industrial and commercial purposes. That 2 to 3% of people who will recycle the residential waste will have their opportunities to do that too. But maybe that's oh my gosh, is this reading material? Oh, it's so small I have to wear my glasses on. But anyway, I'll go and stop there while I read. Thank you, Ryan.
Anyone else wishing to discuss on this? I can add a little bit of information to the transfer station thing. One can go back approximately, it's 8-9 years. And the Solid Waste Committee looked at this and made a recommendation to the Assembly, and the Assembly shot it down. So one can go back. That stuff's in the file. Rather than have them completely start over, it would be easier to start with that information and potentially look at bringing something forward. That's not on the incineration, but that's on the transfer deal. And the location was on Sleef Lane, the end of Sleef Lane there, what the borough owns, where it would, yeah, that's kind of that area there. And Smoky's Dump's the best way to describe it. And, yeah, good point. Good point. So, anyway, that would be, something I'm hearing that I think the Assembly's in agreement that the Solid Waste Advisory Committee look into this a bit. Is that what I'm just checking to hear? Amy?
Mr. Mayor, are you asking that the Solid Waste Advisory Board, look at it, or are you talking about the Solid Waste Contract Committee?
Solid Waste Advisory Board. That's where this information came from before. So I think from the citizens, that's more appropriate right now at this point. It's not tied to the contract. We would have to make changes to a new contract when we go out if we're going to do something. So it's I think the time. But what would you guys? I'm asking is that I'm seeing heads nod. So basically, we give direction to have solid waste dig up the old information, look at it, make it current, and bring it potentially a recommendation back. That's the direction we're given right now. Okay, so I'll let it go at that. Then the next item is discussion of an ordinance to update processes for agenda setting and submission of items, and that was submitted by Larry Ledoux. So Larry?
Thank you. I see that it's almost 8:15, and we've had three of the best discussions we've had in a long time, and I really enjoy that. And I think it just shows the capacity of the Assembly to really dig into some issues. Tonight I'm presenting you with a possible ordinance, or a first draft of an ordinance, that will allow two Assembly members to place an item on the work session agenda for discussion. You'll notice that some of the issues that we've talked about tonight were requested months ago. And so what this would allow us to do is for Assembly members two at least, would agree that this is a topic worthy of discussion. I think it's really important, especially when we have new Assembly members who want to share some of their ideas, one of the impetus for them to run for election and some of the changes, or certainly to express their vision for Kodiak. But ideally, it's to broaden access to discussions so that current issues can be talked about in a timely manner and set aside to a later date, but at least it would provide an opportunity for the Assembly to say, this is a topic that we need to talk about as soon as possible. One of the discussions tonight, for example, we say this will take time. Well, this discussion was requested months ago, and it's something that would have started that clock rolling right away. And we certainly have the capacity to have deep discussions. I also believe that when we talk about items that the Assembly brings together in a timely manner, it creates a group wisdom that we get smarter as we learn from one another. None of us would want to make these decisions that we talk about on our own. We get smarter as we talk about it, and there's a deeper wisdom the more we dialogue with one another on topics that are important to us. Pardon, Mr. Smiley?
Nothing.
Continue, Larry.
So I think it's, we all come with priorities. I don't know what some of the new priorities are. As I listen to new Assembly members, I start to understand where they're coming from, and it really helps. And so I think it's important that we hear. I was a deputy presiding officer for a year, and all agendas for the two mayors that I worked with at the time were done collaboratively. Immediately and collaboratively, there was no final say. It was just, here's what we're going to do. The last two meetings we attended, our work session, we ended in less than an hour, and there are a number of meetings where we certainly have time to address issues. We don't have to quit till 11, and many of our, it was 11 o'clock?
No.
It's 10:30 unless
All right.
we vote.
All right, 10:30. I think I've been to one meeting where we pushed the limit, and that was because of executive. So we certainly have time to discuss a number of issues. I believe that some issues that we need to talk about all the time. I believe that the budget needs to be on our agenda continually. We are in the final stages of a budget, and I don't remember, and I may have missed an assembly meeting, where we've had a discussion where we laid out priorities for our manager, who is developing a budget with essentially no input from the assembly other than we have a tax cap. Maybe, excuse me, have we had any discussions to give you those priorities? And that is a concern of mine, that we need to have these discussions, because we get into a whirlpool where all of a sudden we don't have any time, and we just got to get it done, and we have to do it. And those should be continuous, and I believe that we can make that happen. I think right now, there are critical topics that are of interest to the assembly and the community, but as we move toward the budget, we're going to be talking budget every meeting, or certainly spending a couple evenings talking about, what do we always talk about? Funding for nonprofits. We usually have a couple of meetings or several. But we have a number of critical topics that we need to talk about, and we're going to be tied up with budget for the next couple of months. And we could have talked about these earlier. And I don't believe it's fair to place this responsibility directly on the mayor to make these decisions. So it's not a mayor problem, it's an assembly problem. I believe that 2 assembly members provides ample time to discuss it to see if it's worth. If we go to 3, then we start getting into the Open Meetings Act, and it could be really dangerous. So I think 2 reasonable assembly members who are looking at our agenda is enough to request it. I also believe that within the ordinance, 30 days is a reasonable time period. I believe that reasonable assembly members looking at the agenda, looking at the tasks that may move down to administration, can make good decisions about when they make these requests so that they don't overload the system. If they do come before the assembly doesn't have to spend any more time than they want on these work session topics. If they're not interested in talking about it, it could be put to rest in 5 minutes. But if it is important, it will provide an opportunity for some of these discussions that need to take place and that have not. I believe that the discussion during the work session will initiate discussion, especially if the discussion requires staff research. I think we have to be very careful. But again, I think that's something that we could moderate once it comes before the assembly. So if it comes before the assembly, if it's interesting, if we want to do it, we could move the discussion to another time, but the introductory discussion will allow the assembly to take ownership from 2 to 7, if you will. In that point in time, they could work with the manager to find a time where the staff would have enough to collect the information. But to give you an example of some of the things that I think about, coming to meetings, are the budget, long-term planning, lands. I've been here a year and a half and we haven't done anything with lands. Economic development, hospital costs, school maintenance, taxation, service district contracts, fishery support committee, our infrastructure, emergency preparedness, rural relationships, how we manage the Shuyak Fund, the rocket launch, collaboration with the city, and many quality of life issues. So I think there's many topics to discuss. I think it's a pretty reasonable ordinance. Currently, if you propose an ordinance, you have 30 days and it has to go on the agenda. But if we want something on the work session agenda, there is no vehicle other than to fill a yellow request form. And sometimes they take months to move to the work session agenda. So it's a simple ordinance. There's not a lot of changes. It just spreads out the agenda. Thank you.
Let's take a 5-minute break. Lena? Okay. Reconvene from the recess. Larry, you were done. Is there any further discussion that anybody would like at this time? And then I'll respond. Bo?
I support this and mostly because I do feel that we should be making the maximum use of the time available. And this is a strong statement. This is gonna come off as me saying this in jest, but there's a lot of truth to it. I am very willing to meet until 10:30 if that means we have some things we can do to help the community. And the reason I say this is a big deal, and someone can verify this, that my bedtime is like 9 o'clock. See, she said it before I did. I start strongly thinking about going to bed at about 8:30. I'm in bed between 9 and 9:30, and I'm asleep almost immediately. So that says a lot that I'm willing to stay up well past my bedtime. But in all seriousness, there's a lot of, Mr. Ledoux named a lot of topics that we need to spend some time on. I think we should be packing this agenda despite it being exhausting, but that's what we're here to do. That's what I signed up for. I'm very happy to do it. It's tiring, but it's important to the community. They expect us to do the work. I said this last night, and I believe the community is either beginning to or has been, and maybe they're just more vocal because they have the means to do it more publicly. They're losing faith in municipal government. They don't feel like the effort is being put forth, and this is one way to show them that by packing these agendas with items that are important to the community and that can benefit the community, that we're willing to put in the time and the effort. Same goes for these joint meetings with the city council. Once a year, definitely ain't gonna cut it. Quarterly, bare minimum, in my opinion. We need to put the time in, show people we're serious. That's what we're up here to do. So thank you, Mr. Ledoux. I fully support it.
Okay, Jared, then Ryan.
Oh, I think their hands were way up, way before mine.
No, you're,
Okay. Yeah, I like this too. A couple things. I know this isn't on, the ordinance isn't on the table right now, but online, or in D1, line 66, 67, maybe clarify submission to the clerk's office. If that's your intent. 60, it could go on, line 66, from submission of the request for, or 67, to the clerk's office, or to the clerks. The 30 days is, I think, interesting and probably fair. I'm speaking as the future mayor myself when I beat Scott Arndt again in an election. Just kidding.
thanks, Jared.
But I think the mayor does have a responsibility to control the scope and the flow of a meeting and of the agenda. Will there be a time when there are 10 agenda item requests that the mayor has to parse out between two work sessions, and depending on the time of the year when we don't meet for 2 or 3 weeks, like around AML, the 30 days could be restrictive. So I wonder if there's some language in there that maybe 30 days, but in certain circumstances, the mayor can negotiate with the item sponsors about the time. I don't know what the language answer is in there. But I wonder if there's a way we can build in some flexibility just for, those times that we don't meet for a couple of weeks, cancel some meetings. Or if, like, we're moving into budget season where our work session is going to be comprised of a lot of budget discussions, but then there are an additional 5 or so, who knows, agenda item requests. I always think about, worst possible cases kind of thing. But so I just wonder if there's some flexibility we can build into that one.
Okay. Ryan,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also support this ordinance, and I'll tell you, one of the key factors that Mr. Ledoux stated was that as a new assembly member, it took a little bit of time on here to understand how to navigate the process. And I'll tell you that when we discussed canceling a meeting because there was nothing to talk about, I was absolutely defeated knowing that I had 4 or 5 yellow slips in, and I didn't know how to make that happen. And so I see this as an opportunity to prevent that from happening in the future. And so I fully support this as listed in our packet. Thank you.
Okay. A few things I'd like to say. I'd like to hold off on this a little bit. The reason being, when I tried to get a copy of this after our meeting on February 1st, I was not allowed to get a copy of it. I wanted that before I left, and I first got full copy here this week, and I need to talk with the clerk, because this is not, if we're going to do this, it needs to be all-inclusive, and there's a bunch of things that are not addressed in here. So I would appreciate being able to talk with the clerk and look at drafting a version 2 that we can talk about. I understand, and, is everything perfect in the world? But if we're going to address things, I don't agree with everything here, but I understand, and I don't have a problem talking about it. But there's also several things that are not mentioned in here that we need to clear up at the same time. So I'm trying to remember, I don't know when exactly Nova gets back, but my intent would be that it would be on the March 28th work session. What's that? On the 11th. Yeah. 14th for the
Work session.
Yeah, that's not enough time. She's got other things she's got to do too. And it needs to be in the packet, so that's not going to happen. I would request the work session on the 28th of March on there, so that it can get to everybody in a much better fashion than what I was given it. Lena?
Mr. Mayor, if the Assembly agrees, we can start drafting version 2 before Nova returns. If
No,
you'd
my
like to work
intent
on
is
that.
to wait till she gets back.
Okay.
She drafted this, and I want to talk to her. She's got the most experience on it, so that's what I'm asking, that I be granted that flexibility. Larry?
Yeah, I don't agree with you. I believe this is following the code. It's the right of assembly members to submit an ordinance. It's not the right of the mayor to hold off or to suggest that or to write their own versions. They can do that through the normal process as any assembly member would do. The mayor has no more authority than any assembly member to request a delay. If you want to develop an alternative, you certainly have a clerk here that can do it. The process is here, and to delay it, if you disagree with it, you have a right to veto it or to suggest changes through the process. But to just delay this is exactly what the code says shouldn't happen. When an ordinance is requested, there's a timeline, and it's there. And there is no requirement that the mayor review an assembly member ordinance prior to when it's put together. So you saw it when everybody else did. And if you disagree with it, you certainly have the right through the code to adjust it. So I don't know why we would delay this.
Larry, 2 days is not
I'm an
adequate.
assembly member, not Larry.
Larry, 2 days is not enough. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, one of the things that as a new assembly member, that I find, I guess I'll just say disheartening again. Ma'am, I don't know if I can use that word enough tonight when it comes to this. We as a body of elected officials, it's our responsibility to cohesively work together. And it's our responsibility to cohesively work together with other governments and within our own entity. And I have to tell you that, in my opinion, if a process is being followed the way that it's supposed to be followed, then if you don't agree with the process, you should work, just like the rest of us, to try and change that process. I don't agree with delaying this, and I think that we have a clerk here that is more than capable to help draft a version 2 if that's the position that you are seeking. This is a work session, so we're not going to solve the problems tonight. This is for general discussion, as I understand it. And so I think that time is of the essence. If you're interested in a version 2, I would actually help you author that so that we can try and cohesively work together and bridge the gap between what Assemblymember Ledoux and yourself are trying to work towards. But to sit up here and disagree and banter back and forth is not what I signed up for, not even in the slightest. Thank you.
James?
So, let me get this straight. This is a discussion item. It is not an ordinance that is moving forward just yet until, no, I just clicked off the wrong one. This is the first time seeing this, so it's the start of a discussion, then we schedule it for another work session, and then we have a public,
First reading.
yeah, we have a first reading, which would be the second,
After the second work session is what I'm asking
after the
for.
second work session, typically. So it doesn't sound like he's asking for too much. He's just, I mean, basically, we're gonna have another work session, so we can talk about it next work session again. And then the following work session on the 28th, when it is, I mean, we're not gonna have it as a public hearing on the 21st.
Right, that would, what I'm looking at is work session on the 28th, puts it as a.
Right, but what I'm saying is, the work session on the 14th, if we wanted to have it introduced, that still gives us another 2 work sessions before it goes on to a public meeting. That's another month and a half before, so the second draft could come in, but just having it on as a piece to introduce, and then having a second draft. I mean, that's basically what the way that it works, right? I mean, we're talking about putting it in for introduction next week on the 7th. Then we have a work session, and then we have a regular meeting, and then another work session, and then a public hearing on the 4th of April. Clarification?
It could be. Lena?
So right now, if the assembly decides, they can direct the clerk to place this item for introduction. So that would mean it would go on introduction on the March 7th
Yeah. Regular
agenda.
meeting on the 7th.
And then, so the public hearing would be on the 21st. So he would only have the work session of the 14th is what he was referring to create a version 2.
That's if we say that we want it on the regular meeting of
Right.
the 7th.
Right.
Right. So the assembly can direct the clerk to place it on the March 21st for introduction. However, the direction of the assembly goes is where Mayor Arndt's version 2 would come into place, whether or not he'd have enough time.
But you can't poll the assembly tonight, so you can't find out whether or not that's the assembly's will. And second of all, right now, the way that it is written is the DPO and the mayor and the manager get together and set the agenda. And so whether or not we say that we want it on the next regular meeting for introduction means nothing yet until we vote this in.
Right now, at the direction of the assembly. So the majority tonight can direct the clerk to
But you
place it
can't
for
poll
introduction.
You can't poll the assembly.
The majority can say yes, put it up for introduction. Because it's a
majority.
work session.
You are voting if it's get a majority.
You're not
As soon as you
voting
say
on
it's
the
a majority,
actual
it's a
item.
vote.
Lena?
So if the assembly decides, we can place it on the agenda for introduction. And that's the majority of the assembly. So if 4 or more decide tonight,
Matt, may I?
Yes.
Okay, so
James?
I know that it's not an ordinance, but at any time, 2 members can come together in Robert's rules, 2 members can come together and bring forward a piece to the assembly, whether it's during a regular meeting at any time, or whether it's during a work session, or whether it is advertised prior to a meeting. You can do it at any time. So I don't understand what the whole point of this, I mean, other than putting it on paper, you still have the right, if two people on this board agree, you can bring it forward. It doesn't have to be an ordinance. We follow Robert's rules, and anything not in the ordinance falls back to Robert's rules. And Robert's rules says 2 people on the board can bring it forward at any time.
I don't believe.
Yeah, right now it's not on the
No,
agenda.
I
for
didn't
the
say that
7th.
we would discuss it. I said they can bring it forward and then the group votes.
it
And
has
then
to
you
go on
discuss it.
discussion first. So it has to be approved by the mayor or 2 assembly members.
Right.
To be
That's-
placed on any
My point is not
agenda.
that you're voting on it on a particular item. It is bringing it forward. 2 members can say, I want to bring this. Yes, you can,
Larry?
at any time. And then the members have to vote to whether or not they add it to the agenda.
I believe that any additions to the agenda after it's published have to be approved by unanimous vote of the assembly, not 2 assembly members.
I didn't say the
He didn't say
agenda
that.
changing. I said, if you and I decide that we wanted to bring this forward in the next regular meeting, okay? This is written up, you hand it to all of the assembly members, and you say, I want to put this on the agenda tonight because I think it's important tonight, then that's when the assembly votes on it and you can talk about it. That is what I'm saying. You can bring forward any topic at any time as long as 2 people bring it in. You got a first and a second. And you could do that at any time, and then you take a vote for a unanimous vote.
Larry?
That would mean that it's not the 2 people that you can bring it, but unless you get a unanimous vote, it's useless.
But the point is that the progress of setting agenda setting, okay, that's what you're talking about. You're not talking about it actually going forward, you're talking about setting it on the agenda.
This ordinance is speaking specifically to putting an item, 2 assembly members can put something on the work session agenda. Right now, the only person besides the manager for, I think it says for specific operational, is the mayor. In the past, it's been different, but right now, the code says the mayor sets the agenda. Once the agenda is set, so we could have 100 yellow papers, and if the mayor doesn't want to bring them forward, he may not do that unless we have a unanimous vote. So what I'm suggesting is to, for the reasons that I gave it during the introduction, that 2 assembly members can bring something to a work session agenda. It doesn't mean that the assembly has to spend a lot of time talking about them, but it does allow items to go before the entire assembly for discussion. What you're suggesting is the only way to do that is to have a 7-member agreement for that to happen. Because right now, the code says the mayor does that. And so that supersedes Robert's rules.
Now,
Yeah. I understand that.
I mean, Robert's rules doesn't let the deputy providing officer or person running the meeting talk until the end of the session. They're not allowed to give input, if we're following that as an example.
no,
No, that's
not
correct.
true
That is correct.
on there. Now, I'm going to go ahead and interject here on it. What I'm asking for is it would be the work session on the 28th and be on the agenda for first reading on April 4th and move forward there. Now, there are things in here that aren't here. Larry has not, when you start tearing something apart, you need to look at it all. It's not the way we operate in that there's 4 people in agenda setting, and one of those is the mayor, the deputy presiding officer, the manager, and the clerk. Now, that isn't written in there, and that needs to be put in there as to what we're doing on there, because we've had mayors that have refused to allow the deputy presiding officer to be in agenda setting on there. And that's a shitty way to go. I just did. Thank you. Now, I think it's appropriate to try and clean up some of these other things too, and that's what I need Nova for. And so I respectfully request that we work along that lines, that you allow me that leeway, please. So it's up to you guys, how it goes forward.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, if I may. I
Okay.
don't have to ask. I can
No, you
say
just
that.
called me. So, and what's your point?
I am now confused as to what we are attempting to achieve with this spirited exchange. I'm unclear as to, I understand what your request is. I'm unsure if the wishes of those who co-sponsored this ordinance and are looking to discuss it, if they wish to continue with a specified timeline. I'm not sure, because there's been differing opinions. I'm going to lean on the clerk to give me a little bit of guidance here and clarify what are our options, because I'm unsure where we're at with this.
Lena, go ahead.
If there's not an agreement on whether or not to move this forward for introduction or postpone to the meeting of April, as the mayor requested, I believe we can add this as a discussion item to the next work session, and then discuss again and decide again whether or not we're going to bring it up for introduction, until there's a consensus on whether or not this is ready to move to introduction and then public hearing. So that will again allow more time for the mayor as well to draft a version 2. So it's really Assemblymember Sherritt and Assemblymember Ledoux to decide whether or not they're willing to wait.
Okay, thank you, that was very helpful.
Larry?
I believe the introduction of an ordinance and what you see before you is a draft. I've rarely seen an ordinance go through the system that isn't revised by a motion, modified, or replaced with a version 2 or A, B, or C. But to have the mayor say that he wants to delay the process to write his own is something that I've never seen before. Okay, I believe that he can do that within the timeline. We have a clerk here. The process needs to move forward. We have a lot of business to discuss. And I see no reason to delay it other than the mayor, as he said, doesn't like some of the content. And that's for the process. That's why there's a process.
Jared?
So I think you've had 4 people already speak in support of moving the ordinance forward. How I see it, then, the next step is, right, it's not part of next week's packet that we are reviewing right now, unless, if we're going with status quo, right, the mayor who sets the agenda decides to add it to the March 7th regular meeting. So then the next step, then, it's added to the March 21st regular meeting, and it's part of the packet review on our next work session, which is March 14th. And then it's part of that discussion of packet review. So that's what I see. I think you have received a majority consensus through our comments, and so then the next step is to put it on the packet review at the next work session, to be introduced formally at the March 21st regular meeting. That's where I'm at.
Ryan?
You kind of quivered when you called my name. I like that. So I'll just, I guess, share my position. So could someone refresh the last couple of weeks have been traveling with AML and things. Could someone refresh me on whether or not we voted to approve the mayor to go to that travel? Did we approve that? So with that being said, we as an assembly approved that travel. He was out of town. As much as I don't want to delay this, because I think that this is a very important ordinance for equalization, I would be in support of pushing this over to the next work session, allowing the mayor to have an opportunity to write version 2, because we did, as an assembly, approve his travel during the time when he could have been able to have some input or some time on this. So that's the only reason I'm in actual support of pushing this down the road, not for any other reason, so.
Thank you. So that pushes it off there till then. And I will use Nova's time the day she comes back up until that end, because there's some other things that need to be cleaned up in this. So it'll be a combination of the clerk's office on there, and Lena will be helping, but I want Nova there. She did the first one. So thank you. Go ahead, Ryan.
So just for my own verification, so when we say, let's put this on the next work session,
Right.
Sorry?
Right, go ahead.
It by default goes there. There's no way that the mayor could say, we're not going to talk about that.
No.
Well, he just agreed to it, so.
Yeah. With
But I do
with the
know-
agreement of my deputy presiding officer.
So I just want to make sure that this can't fall off the radar. Okay, cannot.
I
Thank you.
understand that too. Thank you. Bo, and then
I
Steve.
just want to make a general comment, and we've had a lot of feelings in these topics tonight. I encourage professional behavior. It's fun to poke here and there. I get that. However, this is a public meeting. I encourage professional behavior. Joking, I think, should be limited, if not eliminated, from these meetings.
Steve.
Assemblymember Brian Sherritt earlier mentioned that he was willing to work with the mayor and talk about the issues involved, and I would very much encourage that to happen. So hopefully we can smoothly come to an agreement quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and move on here. I think we've established. Lena, are you clear?
So, to clarify, we're moving this for discussion on the meeting, the work session of the
14th.
14th, again.
Thank you, yes.
Thank you.
With the concurrence of the deputy presiding officer. All righty. Next item on the agenda is discussion of Pacific Seafood Processors Association request for a resolution to support efforts to improve competitiveness and resilience of the Alaska seafood industry. Amy, I'm going to turn this over to you, please.
What a great night to do that. In your packet on page 133 and 144, or if you're doing the split screen version on your screen up there, is page 10 and 11 of that agenda item. Pacific Seafood Processors Association has asked the Assembly to pass that resolution. As you read it, there are a bunch of whereases there. And they're asking to improve and expand agency funding that supports U.S. seafoods, integrate U.S. seafood production into national food policy strategies and USDA programs, and restore fairness and reciprocity for international trade. So I know previously the Assembly isn't doesn't really engage with fish policy or prices or anything like that, but this is a different kind of consideration. Julie Bonney was going to try to be here tonight to speak to this, but she had something happen with her family that didn't allow her to be here. But they're asking that we consider passing that resolution. So what would happen tonight is if the assembly supported it, then you would just direct staff to draft that and you'd see it in an upcoming meeting.
Scott?
I support this. I think that PSPA is a really important institution in the state for the fishing industry and for fishermen. I think that UFA is an important institution in the state for fisheries and for fishermen. I think this is a good idea, and I think it deserves our full support.
Ryan?
I agree with Assemblymember Smiley that this is critical for our economy. This is the driving economics of Kodiak, and we should absolutely support this with our fullest intent. Thank you.
Bo?
I agree. I'm supportive as well. I think anytime these types of requests come my way, I'm very careful in reading the language in these types of documents and ensuring we're not favoring any particular sector or gear type. I think they did a fantastic job of avoiding that here and just supporting U.S. seafood in general. So for those reasons, I am fully in support.
Larry?
Well, I think Bo said everything I was going to say. I read this letter very critically because fisheries policy is subject to a lot of disagreement locally on the state level and the federal level, and I was trying to see if there was any kind of, bias that would, but I couldn't find any. I think it's a great letter, and I think it's important that we stand behind fisheries policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? We'll go ahead and put this on the agenda for the meeting on March 7th. Approval. Okay. Next thing we have is packet review, and the first public hearing is ordinance number FY 2024-12, an ordinance of the Assembly of the Kodiak Island Borough, amending Kodiak Island Borough Code Title III, Revenue and Finance, Chapter 3.35, Real Property Tax, Section 3.35.050, Board of Equalization on there. Staff report, Amy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our assessor is here tonight to give that report.
Good evening. Before you tonight is just a code that we need to clean up a little bit. KIBC 3.35050, Board of Equalization. When the attorney was going through and putting together the training for the BOE, we noticed that the standard of proof requirement in E4 is different than what the Alaska Supreme Court has determined was the default standard of proof. So this just changes that. When we created 3.35055, we didn't include this same standard. We did the right way on. So this is just cleaning up the code to make sure that we're doing the right thing as per the law.
Thank you. Any questions? Jared?
Just make sure I have my definitions right, and thanks for staying so late, Seema. Is so clear and convincing evidence is it's like a 90% chance that whatever it is more likely, to be true, and then preponderance of evidence is more like it's 51% more likely that something is true than not.
I believe so.
Okay.
And so the court says that the regular lay person doesn't have to try and do what an attorney would have to try and do.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Questions? Okay, that'll be on the agenda there. The next one for public hearing is ordinance number FY 2024-14, an ordinance of the Assembly of the Kodiak Island Borough, amending the Kodiak Island Borough personnel rules and regulations to add a travel policy. And I'll put this with the manager, Amy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have not had functioning sufficient travel policy in quite some time. This policy fixes that, and the Assembly has seen it. It went through the regular meeting last week and is up for its public hearing this week. This will just standardize travel for all elected, appointed, and staff members, so everyone's treated the same. I included
Including the mayor.
elected and appointed to include all the people.
So, any questions? Discussion? We'll go ahead and move on. The next item will be executive session, and that's in regards to litigation update regarding Kodiak Island Native Association versus Kodiak Island Borough case number 3KO-21-57C1. So next item is manager's comments. Amy?
Super excited about these. For the joint work session with the Kodiak Island Borough School District, that got moved from Tuesday until Wednesday next week, so we'll be meeting on March 6th instead of the 5th. We're in the conference room over at the school district, so looking forward to meeting with them. You'll see this week you got your first draft of the level 1 manager's budget. There are definitely two problems that were easily identified by Assemblymember Turner. The engineering facilities were not paying any rent and apparently not using phones anymore. So we have that updated, and if there's any other updates that come from tonight, we'll get that sent out with those updates. We started not only our internal discussions, but we also went out to Women's Bay Service District, and the finance director and I went to a budget meeting at Fire Service Area 1 this week as well, so we're trying to go out and get some of those service districts and fire area budgets taken care of too. I spent some time making some infographics. I have them both posted over there, but the one that you guys have in front of you is an explanation of what MAPTR is. As we talk about budgets, we're going to start talking about the fact that in our code we have a tax cap. And when I was in your seat, I didn't know what Dora was talking about and she would come up and we would ask her and she would explain it, and I still didn't know what Dora was talking about because it's a little bit confusing about what funds it applies to and what funds it doesn't apply to. So hopefully this helps you be in a better place than I was my first year in understanding what that concept is. That number that's at the bottom, that 16 million number, there will be a slight adjustment to that once we have our notice of values in and we get all of that taken care of, because we don't know the amount of new construction or improvements yet from this year's assessing. So that number will go up a little bit, but not a lot. The big change from last year is that we factored in an 8.1% CPI, and last year's was only 1.5. So it's good for us having less inflation, not good for our tax cap. So if you have questions on that, and this is something that works for you, my next project is the school funding min and max, so that people have a better understanding of the min and max windows for school funding, because that will obviously be a subject that's going to be near and dear to our hearts very soon. We're having all-staff meeting tomorrow morning. Going to introduce our new employees to the whole staff. And it's also Employee Appreciation Day, so we planned that one very well. Chris French and Chief Ellis are both out of their probation period, so they've had their first evaluations. And I would love to talk about this more, but I'm going to keep it short for lobbying. I had a really great experience. I've never felt that patriotic of a human as I did being able to walk into the Senate buildings and the Capitol Hill and know that we were there for a purpose. It was really great, and starting to build those relationships was amazing. Representative Peltola has 2 sons in the Coast Guard, so instant bonding, and has a third in high school that's also about to join the Coast Guard. So we got to spend some time just getting to know about her, and the Coast Guard affects Kodiak in such a great way. It instantly bonds her with our community. So when we were talking about Kodiak becoming a federally designated area so that we can get some of that DOD money to help with hospitals and infrastructure and transportation, she knew what we meant. And so that felt really good. In Juneau, I got to witness the discussion in the House of Senate Bill 140, which was kind of disastrous. Assemblymember Griffin sent me a picture of myself in the gallery going, huh? Trying to figure out. It's impressive, all the pages going around and how busy everyone is, and it was really great. The mayor got to testify in front of Senate Finance and Senate Education while we were there. Those events where you get to find out what the other communities are doing are very worthwhile. When I don't understand a policy of what we're doing, and I can go ask Ketchikan and Sitka and Cordova and all those communities that are coastal and figure out what they're doing within 5 minutes, those are great trips. So if you're considering travel, AML is really good if you want to learn what other communities are doing. So I very much enjoyed myself, and I think that we did a lot of good for Kodiak, including talking to the Coast Guard and learning about their needs. We found out more stuff about the Coast Guard from the Coast Guard than we did from anyone else about the Coast Guard. And we were warned before we came in that they weren't going to say anything to us because they looked at us as a link right to Congress, and they were going to be quiet. But I knew people in the room.
We got it out of them.
I knew when we went to see Senator Sullivan, the Coast Guard fellow was a 60 pilot that just left here last year. So those instant bonds were really good. It was a really great trip. In your packet tonight, there's a lot of attachments. We got a return from the Bureau of Indian Affairs that says as of February 14th, we're going to have a response on our deed restriction within 30 days. So excited to hear what that's going to be. We got a chance to talk to the staffs of our senators. They said if that response doesn't come back in a way, a definition that we want, they are willing to do legislative actions to change that if that's the direction that we want to move. We'll talk about that building again in a second. Both Lena and I printed out the Hickey & Associates report. Sorry if you have 2 copies up there. And then from last night's training with the emergency services, Assemblymember Sherritt has already found us training that fast in one night, which is pretty impressive. And it turns out Valdez doesn't want their training that they had scheduled on June 10th, and Kodiak can just slide in there. They come to us, and it costs us nothing. So unless you have major plans for June 10th, start writing that down, because I'm going to work on getting us signed up. They just require 20 people to attend for the class, and their list of suggested people are hospital administrators, local government, police, first responders. I mean, we're going to be able to find 20 people pretty easily, so thank you for sending that. There's different trainings that they offer. I've included 3 flyers in your packet so you can take a look at that, and then we'll figure out which one is best for us. But unless you guys are all going to be gone in June, I'd like to sign us up for that. That should be right when we're in our super hefty budget time, must pass it, so you should be here.
You said June 10th? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have to pass by June 10th.
Mm-hmm. So I think
it'll be
that's why I
done
think you're going to be
typically
here. Yeah.
before that.
So that would be great.
Yeah.
Parks and Rec met this week, and they talked about a grant application for an access project to White Sands Beach. And I'm just so happy with that progress and accessibility to White Sands. That's due by March 6th. We have help from the Elks to fund that. Community Development has done a really good job in making partners in the community. We have Hope Community Resources and Strong Solutions and the City of Kodiak. So we're getting a bunch of senior citizens of Kodiak. We have a lot of letters to go in with us as partners for that grant, so I'm excited about that. Planning and Zoning is talking about ADUs. As Chris mentioned tonight, it's a topic that's really going to affect the community, but at the planning and zoning level, very rarely gets traffic. So if you're interested in ADUs and even how that's going to help or hurt housing, it should help. They're talking about that on the 13th and 20th this month. On March 4th, we have a kickoff meeting for the multi-jurisdictional, multi-hazard mitigation plan. If you remember Chief Ellis from last night talking about how important that is. I know, Steve, I'm sorry, Steve's yawning. That is a plan that is good until November we have in place, but if that lapses, then we're not eligible for any FEMA grants, and that's a really important way for us to get money. So that's how we're starting first on the comprehensive plan. In assessing, they sent out notice of value forms. They don't actually go out from us, but they are being sent today, so you should have them in the next few days. The appeal period for that is March 1st through 30th. So if you get your notice of value and you do not agree with it, you only have until that date to come into the borough and tell us why. So that's important. And also in assessing, they filled their clerk position. So a job offer went out, and we have a clerk starting in assessing on March 4th. I'm going to skip IT because it's long. In finance, we are in the middle of our 4-week newspaper publication for foreclosures. That's going to end on March 8th, and we're still advertising for a general accountant position. In engineering facilities, we have a hospital facilities advisory board scheduled for March 4th. We'll be meeting at the hospital. We'll be talking about the final draft of the health facility space evaluation documents, which we have promised our senators and representatives on a federal and state level to let them know about our needs. So as soon as that's finalized, we'll be sending it to them. And then for some of you, I showed you pictures. We had 2 fin tube assemblies break in one of the central apartments on the mental health buildings. The damage was just discovered last night at like 4:45, like all good disasters do right before the end of the workday. Staff brought in Premier Mechanical and made sure that the flooding was stopped and that the water was stopped. And now NWFF came in today and took a look around, and we're awaiting a proposal from them to figure out what hazardous materials we're dealing with in there. And we're keeping our people out until we figure out what's going on. It was like a steam bath. So the building, you open the door and it was just whoosh, because it was all hot water. And I have pictures I'll show you if you're interested. At the hospital, we started the elevator project. The mandatory site visit was held this week, and they got to go in and see the condition of the elevators. RSA Engineering was here and looked at the new fuel tank installation at the hospital facility and the fuel piping at the long-term care center. Denali Commission funding is looking really good. We're looking to revisit our 2008 solid waste management study, and given tonight's discussion, I think that that's going to be an on-point study on how we want to handle solid waste in the future. For the school district, we have, again, a joint work session on Wednesday. Contractor has let us know that they are ordering materials. They are still anticipating to start work in April, which as of tomorrow, I can say next month. So S. Peterson should be really happy. We're excited to get that going for sure. And I just signed the purchase order for those membranes that were approved last week that have to come from Hungary. I did investigate if those were available by a U.S. manufacturer. There are U.S. manufacturers that make membranes like that, but if we were to order them, we'd have to completely redo those tanks because they don't fit our tank specifications. And there are ones that come that you can buy from America, but they are made in China, and then they look like cheap knockoffs. And so we're sticking with what we know until we go a different direction on that. And then the rest of your packet is all of those attachments, and I'm happy to attempt to answer any questions.
Any question? Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a couple questions. Let's get started. So I have brought this up before in the past. I would encourage, Madam Manager, a increased effort to look at an IDIQ type contracting mechanism with local contractors to help these unanticipated situations that would be an easier dispatch list to help solve the borough problems. So that method is an IDIQ, easily searchable if you're not familiar with it. Next, I continue to see on the landfill that staff is arranging training for a machine that we ordered a while ago. I know that that machine has had some difficulty getting here, but still seeing that the staff is arranging training means that we haven't been trained on it yet, which means we're still continuing to rent an excavator. I think that that needs to take place immediately and fall off of your list. Third, the Sergeant Creek Park equipment, that equipment procurement is out for bid. That never went to the ARB. There's quite a bit of community concern about how we're doing that with their playgrounds and the methodology for that. Next on the list is, in our meeting last night, we talked about the invoicing for the communication tax, the E911 tax, and how the city is over-invoicing the borough. The borough receives these invoices. I looked at the legality of what they're doing and how they're writing that off, and we won't speak for the city, but I would encourage us to reject all invoices over the collected tax amount, less than $1,500, so that they don't even enter our system. Finally, wasn't on my list today, but I was under the impression that when you, the manager, left the island, that an acting official was appointed. You left the island and were out of town last week, and our acting official testified at our opening comments that he was also out of town. So I'm wondering who was left in the acting official capacity while both of you were out of town.
There wasn't an active administrative official once Dave left the island.
Thank you.
Okay, Scott.
When you send us the information about the minimum and the maximum that we can give to the school district, there are formulas that I've seen in the past that determine those numbers. If you can find the formulas for us, I think that Dora has them.
They're right on the Department of Education's website. They're not hard to find at all. The min and max are based off of what the basic need for the school system, and they calculate
if you
that
could
for you as well.
just provide it
Sure.
for us so that the numbers make a little more sense.
Yes.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to clerk's comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to remind everyone to file their APOC forms before the 15th. Tomorrow is the 1st of March, Mr. Mayor. And Nova will be back on the 11th. Hopefully she comes back. Aside from that, I think there was really great discussion, and yeah, I look forward to the next meeting.
Thank you. Next item is assembly member comments. Start with Ryan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So I've been able to spend a tremendous amount of time with the school district and was very, I guess, satisfied is the correct term. As they reviewed their budget, they went line by line. They had uncomfortable discussions. The professionalism that the school district portrayed during those contentious discussions was, again, motivating. So I authored this statement last night because I'm excited how we're building a cohesive relationship between the city and the school district. And although my time here on the assembly has been very short, it hasn't involved them very much. And so as we rebuild a cohesive partnership between our local governments, I'm eager for written memorialization in the form of MOUs and MOAs so that both spoken and unspoken expectations are clear and have survivability. As we heard earlier about the Providence Kodiak Island Medical Center lease agreement, we also need to understand those agreements. I encourage us to leave our egos and past negative exchanges far behind the needs of our residents and constituents. I applaud the respect given in this meeting tonight and look forward to future cohesive work sessions such as the one we had tonight. I would encourage us to maintain the vision that there are 3 local governments and to include the Kodiak Island Borough School District in consideration for our other conversations. as we continue down the road of cohesive government. Thank you.
Scott?
The reason we moved the meeting with the school board is because the superintendent was invited to speak before the House Finance Committee. Presumably, she was asked because she did so well on her visit there. So I think that's a real bonus for us and for our school district that she's going to that, even though it delays our meeting with her by a day with the whole school board. When the school board and others, including 2 students, went to Juneau to deal with issues with the legislature and the governor's office, 2 of the students were really amazed at how well Kodiak is doing under the financial limitations that's been imposed upon school districts across the state. We're doing a lot better than a number of other municipalities, and they were quite surprised by that, and they were quite pleased as well. You asked if we're going to be here on the 10th of June. I will not. I'll be in London and having a beer. So.
Thank you. Larry?
Thank you. I too have appreciated the discussion tonight. I really enjoy these discussions, and I feel like we're moving forward. I really want to appreciate the manager for her chart, the maximum allowable property tax revenue. This is the most misunderstood complex in Kodiak, and I think if we did a poll of people on the street, we might have 1 or 2. But I think it does affect what we do here and what our community is able to do with regard to taxes. And I think your chart will really help people understand where our taxes go and the limitations that we have. So I really want to appreciate you doing that. I think it really, really helps. And hopefully we can get that out online so people can see it. Also, I know that the governor has recently appointed a new executive director of the Alaska Spaceport Complex. And I know there's a lot of questions in the community from time to time, but it seems like during work sessions in the past, we've had speakers come and talk to us, sort of a program report. The school district does that at every meeting. They have somebody come in and share for the school board a program, if you will, instead of just dealing with business. And I think it would be really nice to see if the mayor concurs to have a program by the new director and have him perhaps present the vision to the Borough Assembly and to the community at large who may be watching. So I think that would be a really great thing to do. And thank you.
Paul?
Thank you. I echo Dr. Ledoux's sentiment. Infographics, I think, are a fantastic idea. I think there's a lot of misinformation and misconceptions spreading around with how revenue is generated and how it is spent, and people aren't aware of limitations or caps. Please continue to do that. I think, we mentioned this during the joint session. We can't provide enough information and education to the public. We need to make sure people understand when they are wanting to engage with us, having the correct information is critical, because then they're spending their time and energy on something and they might not have all the information needed to drive these discussions. So thank you for doing that. Mr. Sherritt, bravo on this, providing this or lining up this service that quickly for the community. Says a lot about your character and how willing you are to help everyone on both the city and borough government. Great job with that. I'll say this one more time. We have we've had some spirited discussions tonight. There's going to be no shortage of feelings and emotions in future discussions coming up. I encourage professional and courteous behavior from everyone. Joking has its place. I don't feel that this body during work sessions or during the public meetings is the appropriate venue for that. Personal opinion there, but I would like to see more professional conduct going forward. Thank you.
Jared, please.
Thanks to the manager's office and staff for helping us with all of these issues today. Thank you to everyone for the congratulations for the Shakespeares, and they did great. And I've been getting messages all week about how professional they are and how friendly and welcoming they are to the other teams. It's almost as if they get off the island and it's like, ooh, other teenagers, and they're just really excited to see that. Let's see, play that goes wrong this weekend and next weekend. It's the funniest thing that the Arts Council has done in decades. It's so good. It's so good. It's so funny. Well worth your while. I will not be here next week. I'll be at Swampsea, so looking forward to the conversations there. I'll be attending the joint work session through Zoom since we moved that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
I think we had several interesting discussions that'll definitely generate some more research and thought in my mind. And I think especially Ryan Cherritt, he obviously put a lot of time and energy into his project and idea, and I do support finding ways to improve recycling on Kodiak. Thank you.
All righty. James?
Couple things. Thanks for bringing all those things forward today. I love the discussion tonight. I will not be changing my ways. I will still be having fun up here and having arguments and non-arguments and be unprofessional as I can. But all in the spirit of making sure that we get moving on things as much as possible. Arts Council auction is April 20th, so if you haven't gotten your tickets, make sure that you get your tickets. There's usually a lot of good things to bid on, so I will see you there.
Thank you. Mayor's comments, no further comment at this time. Events calendar is March 7th and 8th, Swampsea Economic Summit and Membership Meeting in Anchorage. As Jared said, he'll be traveling to that. April 5th, Cook Inlet Regional Citizens Advisory Board Meeting in Kenai. August 13th and 15th, the Summer AML Conference, which is in Kodiak here. So I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the work session here. James, you got a comment?
You're closing the work session?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we have a special meeting that, unless you would like a recess right now, you want a recess, Lena? 5 minutes? Okay, 5-minute recess, and then we'll start the special meeting. Just, there's no mucus coming up or anything.
If you were going to say it ahead of time, I would have agreed with you.
The big
Just
chairs.
so you know.
We had different chairs. They were much more comfortable than this.
You could have agreed anyway, Larry. You could have agreed